Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche, and this week I'm excited to share with you a state-threatened grass species, beak grass. The Latin name is Diarrhena obovata, and it is state-threatened in Michigan and considered rare in 11 other states. It has a coefficient of conservatism of 9 out of 10, so very high on the scale of being indicative of pre-European settlement conditions, high quality habitat, and a wetness coefficient of -3, so facultative wet if you do wetland delineations. And it is a native perennial grass. And as far as habitat goes, it is found in it's a wetland grass of floodplain swamps and wooded riverbanks in Michigan. You may also find it in other states in slightly more upland woodlands, wooded slopes along bluffs, and shaded limestone cliffs. It really prefers light shade and fairly moist soil conditions, although can get into dry mesic areas occasionally. Loam to silt loam soils, and in places where there's abundant leaf litter. And it can make a great shady ground cover grass if you have property on a river floodplain. And it may be really abundant. It is a clump forming grass, and you can find sparse to dense clumps of it that may form large patches. It vegetatively reproduces by underground rhizomes and spreads that way. And it really needs the right light conditions. So it likes natural disturbance areas from wind throw, canopy gaps, that sort of thing, places where there's minimal vegetation competition, so places that flood regularly and have fewer species to compete with, wet depressions, and I've also seen it a fair bit along maintained trails on river floodplains. As far as range goes, it occurs up in Ontario, across the Midwest and some of the Great Plains states south to Texas, and then east into the Appalachian states, but does not occur in southeast United States or in New England. And in Michigan, you can find it in the southern half of the lower peninsula of Michigan. Midland County is sort of the north side of its natural range. It's known from 14 counties, but I would say this is one of those rare species that often gets overlooked and is probably quite underreported. So that's why I thought I would teach you guys about it today. Let's see if you can find some more records to report. When you're dealing with threatened and endangered species, it's helpful to understand the associated vegetation. What are the associates it grows with? And that helps you know, yes, I'm looking in the right place for this rare species. So for overstory species, habitats that have silver maple, black maple, red ash, eastern sycamore, eastern cottonwood, and we have some great examples of those trees in this river floodplain habitat where we're at right now. Black willow. Common understory shrubs include spice bush and American bladdernut. And typical ground cover plants include green dragon, jack-in-the-pulpit, wild ginger, wild geranium. And rarer ground cover species that are also state threatened or endangered include green violet, golden seal, a tree, red mulberry, also another tree, pumpkin ash, and other ground cover species like ginseng, cut plant, snow trillium, a shrub, wahoo, and twin leaf, a nice little spring flowering ground cover species. So those are the kinds of plants to be looking for to say, okay, I'm in good beak grass habitat, and start looking for the species. There's not a lot known about its faunal associates. The leaves are mined by larvae of dwarf buff moth caterpillars, and then the seeds are are pretty beefy and are likely eaten by upland game birds and small rodents of wooded habitats. And I also wonder if it doesn't provide cover or shade habitat for wood turtles, because wood turtles are so tightly associated with river floodplain habitats. I wonder if that animal-plant interaction doesn't happen as well. As far as identification goes, you are looking for a clumped grass species that can get at most 2 to 3 feet high, and the leaf blades are glossy and dark green, often compared to the surrounding vegetation. They are glabrous, meaning there is no hair, and they're slightly rough textured on the margins. So if you run your fingers down the sides of the leaf blades, I don't know if you can hear that noise or not, but it's a little roughened on the margins. They are 1 to 2 centimeters wide, or about 3/4 of an inch wide, and each blade can get up to 24 inches long. Typical grass species, they have parallel venation, and a good key character on this plant is that the mid-vein is quite prominent and it is off-center. So it doesn't run down the middle of the blade, it's a little set off to one side more than the other. So that dark green, glossy aspect with that mid-vein that is off-center are good key vegetative characteristics for IDing this plant. And the inflorescence is often very helpful in identification. This grass has a long drooping panicle of well-spaced, short and short-beaked spikelets. So let me show you what those look like. And they go from tan or green in color to tan as they mature, and they are shiny. And the grain expands and gets fatter and kind of looks egg-shaped and is shiny, and has a bottle-nosed beak. So you can see that there. And this species may fool you into thinking it is a sedge, but it has a round, not a triangular stem. So let's take a look at that. Grass stems are round and they have air pockets when you look at them in cross-section. Other more technical ways you can tell it apart from a sedge species, it has an open sheath. So the sheath is where the grass or the blade of the leaf meets the stem. So open sheath, you can easily pull that grass blade back. Sedges, that would be a closed sheath, and you would actually be tearing tissue to pull the leaf back. And there are small glooms on beak grass that subtend the spikelet, versus in sedges you would have a single bract and then a sac called a perennial that goes around the achene. So here, let me show you those glooms right here at the base of the grain. So those little spiky structures there. So that wide grain that can get up to 1.8 to 2.5 millimeters wide is another great key characteristic for identifying this plant. The grass flowers in mid-summer and is wind pollinated, and fruit set occurs in late summer to early fall. And that inflated or that enlarged grain helps with dispersal of seed by water, with the cyclical flooding waters coming in spring and or fall in the floodplain habitats. So this species can be identified throughout the growing season vegetatively with those key leaf characteristics I mentioned. Once you get used to that, and have that search image in your mind, you can identify this species. But it is best surveyed for in a time when the mature beaked fruits are present. So in Michigan, that's the 3rd week of August through the 4th week of September. Now this species has some, main threats that are causing it to be listed as state threatened. Those include excessive alteration or development of river floodplain forest habitats. So things like removal of canopy along river floodplains and grading, park infrastructure, development along riverbanks. Think like boat launches and athletic fields, residential properties, that sort of thing. Also, there's the competition from aggressive non-native plant species. So invasive species like multiflora rose, common and glossy buckthorn, Japanese barberry, Dame's rocket, and garlic mustard are cited as really problematic invasive species that can outcompete this grass in its native floodplain habitats. I've also personally witnessed autumn olive getting established and shading this species out. And lastly, and this one's still not completely understood, but invasive emerald ash borer and the death of red ash in river floodplains, that removal of shade, it's a little uncertain how that particular invasive species is impacting populations of beak grass on river floodplains. More research is needed to really be able to answer that question. As far as conservation measures go, there are some things we can do to help keep populations of beak grass established and healthy and thriving. First of all, we need to find it, and we need to report it to the appropriate authorities. So in Michigan, that's Michigan Natural Features Inventory. I'll include a link in the post of how do you report, or where do you report that to the group that manages the state GIS database of where rare things occur, and our Department of Natural Resources. And obviously we can't protect something if we don't know it exists, so identifying where it occurs and reporting that is the first thing we can really do. Secondly, we can carefully plan and execute invasive species management. So that includes knowing where it occurs, so you aren't taking actions to impact this plant. It is protected by state law, so you shouldn't be collecting it. Just take photos when you report. We don't want to be trampling it either on foot or with ORV traffic. As we're doing our invasive species management, we don't want to be putting brush berm piles on top of it. And we want to be very careful about how we approach the use of herbicide to manage invasive species in occupied habitats. So using aquatic label dicot specific herbicides. An example would be triclopyr, a brand name would be Garlon 3A, for managing woody invasive species or foliar spraying. But it's really good if we can not use herbicide and hand pull, so species like Dame's rocket and garlic mustard can be addressed that way. And then to use cut stump treatments on the woody plants rather than lots of herbicide trying to foliar spray them. So how we plan our invasive species management is very important in protecting this species. And then lastly, we can conserve and protect river floodplain forest canopies and hydrology of river systems. So that includes that cyclical flooding regimes that happen on river floodplains. Don't try to prevent that. Keep our floodplains intact and let that flooding occur. And reconnecting fragmented river floodplain forests to create contiguous riparian corridors along our river systems. So just let me reiterate, don't collect this species, take photos and document location on your phone or with a GPS unit when you report. And I just challenge everyone who lives within the species range, get out right now is a great time to be looking for this grass. in river floodplain forested habitats, and let's see if we can't get more spots on the map, more data, and help protect this wonderful state threatened grass.